A billionaire forced a waitress to play the piano, but one song left the entire room in silence. She was not the kind of person you noticed right away. That was the thing about Nadia. She moved through the restaurant the way water moves through a drain, quietly, without fuss, without calling any attention to herself. She had been working at the same upscale restaurant in the heart of New York City for almost 4 years. She knew the menu by heart. She knew which tables needed extra napkins before anyone asked. She knew how to smile at difficult customers without letting anything show on her face. That was a skill she had learned slowly, painfully, one bad night at a time. The restaurant was called Ilara. It was the kind of place where the bread cost more than a full meal somewhere else, and people booked tables 3 months in advance just to say they had been there. The lighting was always low and warm. The tables were far apart so guests could have private conversations. There was a grand piano near the far window, dark wood, polished, beautiful, that nobody ever touched. It was just there for decoration, like a painting on a wall. Nadia had noticed the piano on her very first day of work. She had walked past it slowly, almost without meaning to, and touched the edge of the keys with just one finger before pulling her hand back. Her manager had been watching and gave her a look. She had never touched it again. That was 4 years ago. On the night everything changed, Nadia was working a private dinner in the back room. It was a table of 12, all businessmen and investors, all in suits that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They had booked the room for the evening and were celebrating something. A deal, someone said. A very big deal. The kind of numbers they were throwing around in their conversation were so large they almost stopped making sense. At the head of the table sat a man named Richard Holt. If you followed business news, you would know his name. He was 60 years old, worth somewhere around $4 billion, and had the kind of confidence that came not from kindness, but from always getting what he wanted. He had started a technology company in his 30s, sold it, started another one, sold that too, and had spent the last decade investing in other people's companies, sometimes saving them, sometimes buying them, just to take them apart. Depending on who you asked, he was either a genius or a bully. Most people who had worked for him would say both. Nadia had heard of him before that night. A few of the other waitstaff had whispered when the reservation came in. "Be careful," one of the older waitresses had told her. "He's the type who treats service people like furniture." Nadia had nodded. She had dealt with that type before. She managed the first 2 hours without any problem. She was careful, professional, attentive without being intrusive. She made sure the wine glasses were never empty for too long. She answered questions politely. She stayed calm when one of the guests sent back his steak twice for no real reason, except that he could. Then, somewhere around the 3rd hour, Richard Holt pushed back from the table slightly and looked across the room. His eyes landed on the grand piano by the window. Then they landed on Nadia. "You," he said, pointing at her. Not rudely, but casually, the way someone points at a chair they want moved. "Go play something on that piano." The table went quiet for a second. Some of the guests looked up. Nadia blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The piano," he said again, as if she had not understood. "Play something. It's been a quiet evening, and we could use a little background music." She stood very still. "Sir, I'm the waitress. I don't play the piano. There's a house pianist who comes in on weekends, but every woman I have ever met who comes from a certain kind of background plays the piano," he said, cutting her off with a wave of his hand. "It's just what they do, violin or piano. Go on, sit down and play. Think of it as part of your tip." Someone at the table laughed. Not everyone, just 1 or 2 people. But it was enough. Nadia felt the heat rise in her face. She was very aware of every pair of eyes in the room on her. She was also very aware of her manager standing near the doorway, who gave her a look that said, very clearly, "Don't make a scene." She thought about saying no. She thought about how satisfying it would be to just say, firmly and calmly, no. But she also thought about her rent and the hospital bill she was still paying off from last winter when her mother had gotten sick, and the fact that this man's table alone was a significant portion of the restaurant's earnings for the night. So she set down her tray. She walked to the piano. She could hear someone at the table make a small comment. She did not catch the words, but she heard the amusement in the voice. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. She looked at the keys for a long moment. Her hands rested in her lap. Any time, Richard Holt said from across the room. He had already turned back to his guests, like he had already lost interest. Nadia placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play. What came out of that piano was not background music. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that starts quietly, almost like someone speaking in a low voice late at night, and then slowly, over several minutes, builds into something so large and so full of feeling that it fills every corner of the room. It is not a simple piece. It is not something you pick up and learn in a few months. It takes years to even understand, and more years still to truly play. Nadia had been playing since she was 5 years old. Her mother had started teaching her on an old upright piano in their small apartment. When her mother got sick years later and could no longer work, Nadia had quietly let go of her plans to audition for the city's music conservatory. Quietly, without complaint, the way she did most things. She had taken the waitressing job instead. It paid better than teaching piano lessons, and her mother needed the money. She had not played regularly in almost 2 years. But the hands remember. That is the strange and beautiful thing about music. The hands always remember. The first few bars filled the room. One of the guests who had been in the middle of a sentence stopped talking. Just stopped, mid-word. Another one slowly set down his wine glass without seeming to notice he was doing it. Richard Holt was still half-turned toward his guests when the music started, but within 30 seconds he had turned around completely and was facing the piano. Nobody spoke, nobody laughed. Nobody picked up their phone. The piece moved through the room like weather, starting as something light and then becoming, slowly, a storm. There is a section in the middle where the music climbs higher and higher before crashing down with a force that feels almost physical. When that moment came, one of the guests drew in a sharp breath without meaning to. Another one looked down at the table. Nadia was not performing for them. That was the thing they could all sense, even if none of them could quite name it. She was not playing to impress anyone. She was just playing. The way a person speaks honestly when they think no one is really listening. Every note carried something real in it. Grief, maybe. Tiredness, maybe. Something that had been sitting quietly in her chest for a long time, waiting for a moment to come out. The piece lasted about 8 minutes. When the final note faded out, and her hands lifted from the keys, there was silence. Not polite silence. Not the brief pause before applause. Real silence. The kind where no one is sure they should breathe too loudly. The kind that means something landed. It lasted for a long time. Long enough that Nadia turned slightly on the bench and looked at the table. 12 people sat there, all of them quiet. One woman near the end of the table had tears on her cheeks. She did not seem embarrassed by it. A man in the middle was staring at the table, his jaw tight, as if he was working very hard to hold his expression together. Richard Holt was looking directly at her. His elbows were on the table, his hands clasped together in front of his face. He said nothing. Then the woman with the tears began to clap. Slowly at first, then others joined, and within a few seconds everyone at the table was applauding, genuinely, not politely. Nadia stood, smoothed her apron, and walked back to pick up her tray. She finished the rest of her shift without another word about it. But as the guests were leaving, Richard Holt stopped near the door. He waited until the others had gone ahead. Then he turned and looked at Nadia, who was clearing a nearby table. "How long have you played?" he asked. "Since I was 5, she said, without looking up. He was quiet for a moment. "Why are you here?" She did look up then. "Because this is my job." "That's not what I mean," he said. She understood what he meant. She didn't answer. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the table next to the glasses she was gathering. A small card. "That's the name of a foundation I run. It supports musicians who stopped performing and want to come back. The application is straightforward. I think you should look at it." Nadia picked up the card and looked at it. Then she looked at him. "You humiliated me in front of your entire table tonight," she said. Her voice was calm, flat, almost. "You treated me like a party trick." He did not flinch from it. "I know," he said. "I'm aware of that." "So," she said. He nodded slowly. "So, both things are true." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she slipped the card into her apron pocket and went back to clearing the table. He left without another word. The card sat in her apron for 3 days before she took it out and looked at it again. She did not apply right away. She thought about it for 2 weeks. sitting with her doubt, her practicality, all the very real reasons it was easier to just leave things the way they were. But she applied. 4 months later, Nadia performed at a recital hall on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, hosted by the Foundation. It was a proper stage, not large, maybe 200 seats, but real. The kind of room she had dreamed about at 19, before life had quietly rerouted her plans. She played the same piece. Richard Holt was in the audience. He sat in the fourth row, alone, without his phone out. He did not look like a billionaire that evening. He just looked like someone who had come to listen. When it ended and the room applauded, Nadia stood and took a small bow. She looked out at the audience for just a moment, not searching for anyone in particular, just taking in the room, and then walked off the stage. She had 2 more performances scheduled that year. She was still working at the restaurant while the calendar filled up. It was not a dramatic overnight transformation. Life rarely works that way. But something had shifted, quietly and permanently, the night she sat down at a piano she was not supposed to touch. There is something strange about the way people are seen in this world, or rather, the way they are not seen. A woman carries a tray, and people look at the tray. They look at the wine, the plate, the table. They look past the hands holding everything up. They look past the years and the grief, and the talent those hands carry. Until, one ordinary night, those hands sit down at a piano, and the whole room goes quiet.